Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of our Scary Stories. I'm your host, and tonight we have a story that reaches into the depths of ancient curses, moral dilemmas, and the haunting call of the unknown. In a quiet, seemingly uneventful town, there lies a field, a cornfield unlike any other. You've heard of places that you should never visit, but what happens when curiosity conquers caution? Brace yourselves as we venture into the Silver Cornfield. Dim the lights, make sure your doors are locked, and let's tread into the darkness together. The world was still dark when Lily woke up, her room shrouded in those gray hues that appear just before dawn. She sat up, allowing the crumpled bedsheets to fall away from her young frame. Barefoot, she padded over to her window and peered out at the silhouette of Maplewood, her new home. The small, isolated town was as if frozen in time, its colonial houses standing like stern, aged sentinels guarding lives that moved at a glacial pace. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted into Lily's room from downstairs, drawing her attention to the coziness of her new house. Even as a new resident, she felt that Maplewood's very walls and timbers demanded conformity, a strict adherence to age-old routines. With that thought, she quickly got dressed and made her way downstairs. The aroma grew stronger as she descended, filling her senses, momentarily pushing aside the curiosity that had nestled in the corners of her mind since moving here. "Morning, sweetie," her mother, Jane, greeted, placing a basket of rolls onto the family breakfast table. Her father, Mark, was already engrossed in the morning newspaper, the headline too distant for Lily to read. "Morning," Lily replied, picking at her food, her thoughts already wandering toward her day ahead at Maplewood Middle School. By the time Lily reached the schoolyard, it was buzzing with students engaged in animated discussions. Friends were huddled in groups, but Lily was alone, still a newcomer. It wasn't until she overheard the hushed whispers of her classmates, Andy and Sarah, that her ears pricked up like a cat sensing a far-off noise. "Did you hear about the Silver Cornfield?" Sarah murmured, casting a wary eye toward the adults loitering nearby. "You mean the werewolf thing?" Andy responded, a nervous giggle escaping his lips. "Just stories to scare kids." Sarah shushed him. "It's not a joke. My sister's friend went there once, and he said he heard something, howling or crying. He wasn't sure. He never went back." Lily could contain herself no longer. "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear. What's the Silver Cornfield?" Andy and Sarah looked at her as if she'd just announced she was from another planet. "You don't know." Andy was incredulous. "You've never heard the stories." Before Lily could respond, the bell rang, but the question, and the fear in her classmates' eyes, lingered in her mind. That evening, after a dinner that tasted of nothing and everything all at once, Lily found her parents in the living room. "Mom, Dad, what's the Silver Cornfield?" Jane and Mark exchanged glances. "Ah, the local folklore," Mark chuckled, a touch of unease sneaking into his voice. "It's just a story, Lily, meant to keep kids from straying into the cornfields and getting lost." "But is there something about a werewolf?" Lily pressed on, her voice tinged with urgency. Jane sighed. "Every place has its tales, sweetheart. Here, it's a werewolf. Other places, it might be a witch or a haunted house. It's just people's way of making sense of things they don't understand." Her parents' vague answers only fueled Lily's burgeoning obsession. And as if on cue, the night air was split by a distant howl, one that seemed to come from the direction of the very cornfield that was becoming the epicenter of Lily's thoughts. It was a mournful, bone-chilling sound that threaded its way through the walls of their home, bypassed the cheerful family portraits, and found its way into Lily's core, settling there like a seed in fertile ground. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, Lily felt a shiver of genuine fear crawl up her spine, making her feel alive in her dread. And so it was with a mixture of terror and an insatiable curiosity that Lily found her thoughts drifting back to that mysterious, forbidden expanse of rustling stalks and hidden shadows. The Silver Cornfield. It was as if the very words were a key, unlocking a door to a room she had yet to enter but knew, with an unsettling certainty, she would never be able to leave untouched. As Lily retreated to her room that night, she found herself gazing once again out of her window, her eyes straining against the obsidian sky. It seemed darker than usual, and yet, in that velvety blackness, the full moon hung low and heavy, as if it too were burdened with the secrets of Maplewood. And so the night wore on, quiet as a whisper, yet loud as a warning, promising nothing and everything all at once. Lily could not shake off the sensation that something monumental lay ahead, a feeling that solidified when another howl, distant yet unmistakable, sliced through the still air, piercing her very soul. The Silver Cornfield was calling, and it was a summons Lily knew she could not ignore. Lily's footsteps echoed in the library, a building as antiquated as the town itself. Rows upon rows of bookshelves reached toward the ceiling like gnarled fingers, while the ambient light seemed too dim, as though struggling to pierce the shroud of Maplewood's secrets. "Can I help you find anything?" The librarian, Mrs. Thompson, squinted at her from behind thick-rimmed glasses. "I'm looking for information on the Silver Cornfield," Lily uttered, almost in a whisper. Mrs. Thompson's expression tightened for just a moment, a flicker of some unspoken emotion. "Local history is in the back, third row on the left." "Thank you," Lily said, her voice laced with a mix of eagerness and trepidation. As she delved into the local history section, her eyes caught on a stack of aged newspapers bound together with frayed twine. Taking a seat at one of the long wooden tables, she unwound the string and began flipping through the brittle pages. Amidst reports of harvest festivals and town hall meetings, she found what she was looking for, headlines featuring ominous accounts of the Silver Cornfield. "Unearthly howls disturb night's silence," she read under her breath, the words printed in the kind of typeface that spoke of a bygone era. Skimming the article, her eyes widened. Witnesses reported hearing cries that sounded half-human, as if torn between worlds. A sudden creak from the other end of the library made her start. It was just Mrs. Thompson shelving books, but Lily felt her heartbeat quicken. Shaking off her nerves, she refocused on the documents before her. Digging deeper, she unearthed a copy of an old diary wedged between two dusty encyclopedias. The leather was weathered, the pages tinged yellow with age. The diary belonged to a certain Abigail Carter, dated back to the 1800s. Abigail wrote of a local outcast, a man who had been cursed and turned into a werewolf. But what caught Lily's attention was a particular passage. "The beast is not purely evil but ensnared in its own fate. Redemption awaits it, a deliverance bound by a specific, unthinkable act." Lily sat back, her eyes leaving the page but still seeing the words imprinted in her mind. An unthinkable act. What could that be? A pit of dread opened within her, dark and bottomless. The notion that the werewolf was not a simple monster but a creature in anguish was as unsettling as it was fascinating. She felt herself at a crossroads. A logical part of her brain screamed at her to leave, to forget about the Silver Cornfield, to let its secrets lie buried. But another part, the part that heard the cries of an accursed being in search of redemption, yearned to know more. Closing the diary, she glanced around. Mrs. Thompson was nowhere in sight. Taking a deep breath to settle her swirling thoughts, Lily carefully returned the diary and newspapers to their proper places. Yet even as she left the library, the weight of what she had learned clung to her, as palpable as the air she breathed. That night, Lily found herself once again at her window, her eyes tracing the distant silhouette of the cornfield, barely visible in the moonlight. She could almost hear the rustle of the cornstalks, as if beckoning her to unearth their hidden truths. Yet, accompanying that imagined rustle was another sound, a mournful howl that seemed to come not just from the depths of the field, but from the depths of a tormented soul. Lily clutched her chest, torn between the burning curiosity that had been her lifelong companion and a newfound sense of dread that tightened around her like a noose. For the first time, she questioned whether some secrets, like buried corpses, were better left undisturbed. Yet the howl in the distance spoke not just to her fears, but also to her empathy, to her burning need to understand. Torn between two worlds, much like the creature in her thoughts, Lily knew her life in Maplewood would never be the same again. Her journey into the shadows of the Silver Cornfield had begun, whether she was ready or not. And so she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a maelstrom of fear and fascination. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the complete picture, she sensed, would shake the very foundations of her world. And though she wished she could turn back, that mournful howl echoed in her ears, a siren call from the depths of the unknown. Lily's fate was sealed. The only way out was to venture further in. With a resolve born of both bravery and desperation, she made a silent vow she would uncover the truth behind the Silver Cornfield, no matter where it led her or what it revealed. As sleep finally claimed her, it was not a restful slumber but one fraught with dreams of moonlight, of shadows, and of eyes, yellow and piercing, watching her from the depths of a labyrinthine field of silver corn. The air inside the town's small, cluttered antique store was thick with the scent of aging wood and long-forgotten memories. The bell over the door jingled as Lily stepped inside, her gaze immediately caught by an assortment of curiosities, crystal balls, old paintings, dusty books. But her eyes were drawn to a corner where ancient manuscripts were stacked, almost hidden from view. "Something specific you're looking for, dear?" The store owner, a woman named Mrs. Marlowe, peered at her from behind a counter strewn with faded trinkets. "Oh, I'm just browsing," Lily answered cautiously. Mrs. Marlowe nodded, eyes lingering on Lily as if scrutinizing her very soul. Lily quickly turned her attention to the manuscripts, her fingers lightly touching the parchment as if it might crumble beneath her touch. She flipped through a couple, finding them filled with local folklore, until one in particular caught her eye. It was bound in aged leather and appeared far older than the rest. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the archaic handwriting. Most of it was incomprehensible, but as she leafed through, she found a passage that made her heart stop. The unthinkable act was laid out before her in chilling clarity. For the cursed being to find redemption, a pure-hearted individual must willingly enter the Silver Cornfield on the night of a full moon and offer themselves to the werewolf. Her hands trembled as she closed the manuscript. The words gripped her like icy tendrils, freezing her to the core. A person had to willingly offer themselves. A knot tightened in her stomach, as if her very organs were rebelling against the idea. Was it sacrifice, redemption, or both? She put the manuscript back into its place, her movements mechanical, her mind swirling in a storm of conflicting emotions. Silently, she exited the store, barely noticing Mrs. Marlowe's scrutinizing gaze that followed her to the door. As she walked home, her thoughts formed a chaotic whirlpool. Could she be that person, the one to offer redemption to a cursed being? Her rational mind screamed that it was madness, a tale spun from the delusions of people long dead. Yet another part of her, a part she couldn't silence, found a disturbing sense of purpose in the horrifying act. Could she bring herself to do it? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, heavier than the humid evening air. She reached her home, her sanctuary, yet it no longer felt safe. Her parents were in the living room, laughing at something on the TV, blissfully unaware of the ancient horrors that lurked at the edge of their lives. Lily passed by them wordlessly, her footsteps carrying her up to her room. She sat on her bed, staring at the calendar. The date of the next full moon was circled in red, as if foretelling some ominous event. Her decision, terrifying and irrevocable, formed in that quiet room. She couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it, even to herself, but she knew what she had to do. As night settled around her, Lily took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of her childhood room, a blend of lavender and old books. It offered her no comfort. With a trembling hand, she opened her diary and scribbled the date of the next full moon along with a single word: decision. As she lay in bed that night, the darkness seemed to press against her windows, as if sensing her inner turmoil. But in that pitch-black night, the moon was conspicuously absent, a mere sliver in the sky. In her restless sleep, she was haunted by dreams, neither fully nightmares nor wishes, and when she woke in the morning, she felt as though she had crossed some invisible line. Lily understood that she had stepped onto a path from which there was no turning back. The very fabric of her life was altering, each thread pulling her closer to that looming night of the full moon. A night that promised either redemption or damnation for her and for the tormented creature that haunted the Silver Cornfield. The room seemed to close in on Lily as she sat at her old, wooden desk, its surface covered in an array of items. In front of her lay a small silver locket, an old family heirloom she had found tucked away in her mother's jewelry box, a vial of salt, and a candle made of beeswax. Each item was meticulously placed, as if disturbing their arrangement would disrupt some delicate cosmic balance. She looked at her scribbled notes, pages filled with references to silver as a purifying element, its mythical significance in both protection and ritual. Her hand hovered over the silver locket. She had read about the transformative and conductive properties of silver in arcane rituals. A shiver ran down her spine as she picked it up and opened it. Inside, a small photograph of her family smiled back at her, their faces frozen in time and innocent of the impending, unspoken dread. She closed the locket with a snap, feeling its cold weight sink into her palm, as if absorbing the gravity of what she was about to do. She took a deep breath, the saltiness of her own anxiety filling her nostrils, and placed the locket into a small leather pouch. The atmosphere in her room was stifling, each breath heavy with a sense of impending finality. The evening sun cast long shadows across the floor, signaling the approaching night. She stood up, her heart pounding in her ears, a drumbeat counting down the minutes to her ominous journey. The clatter of dishes and silverware echoed from downstairs. It was time for dinner. Forcing her legs to move, she descended the staircase. Her family was already seated at the table, an arrangement of lasagna, green beans, and garlic bread laid out before them. A scene of domestic tranquility torn asunder by her internal turmoil. "You're just in time," her mother said, smiling up at her as she took her place at the table. Lily forced a smile, feeling as though it was carved onto her face. The tension in her tightened with every bite, the cheese from the lasagna sticking to the roof of her mouth like drying cement. Her father was talking about his day at work, her mother nodding and chiming in with her own anecdotes. Their voices seemed to come from a distant place, muffled and inconsequential. Lily nodded along mechanically, her thoughts already drifting to the looming hours ahead. Finally, dinner was over. She retreated to her room, her sanctuary now transformed into a staging ground for her unsettling mission. Closing the door behind her, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she was no longer fully present in her own life. The sky outside her window had turned a deep shade of indigo, the sun relinquishing its hold to the oncoming night. There it was, a glowing orb hanging low in the sky. The full moon. It looked larger than she had ever seen before, as if drawing closer to witness what she was about to do. She grabbed the leather pouch with the silver locket and other ritual items and tucked it into her jacket pocket. Taking one last look at her room, she felt a shudder of finality ripple through her. Whether driven by misguided idealism or a deeper understanding of cosmic justice, she couldn't say. All she knew was that she couldn't turn back now. With a sense of eerie calm, she opened her bedroom window, its creak sounding like a mournful sigh. The night air was cooler than she had expected, an omen of the icy uncertainty that lay ahead. Slipping out, she made her way through the backyard, the grass wet with evening dew against her ankles. The path that led to the Silver Cornfield was barely visible in the moonlight, a dark ribbon cutting through the wilderness. Each step she took felt like a betrayal of the life she had known, but also an irrevocable commitment to a fate she felt strangely compelled to embrace. As she entered the field, the towering cornstalks seemed to lean in, whispering secrets only the moon could understand. Above, the night sky was a tapestry of stars, twinkling like the eyes of long-departed souls. She felt them watching her as she made her way deeper into the Silver Cornfield, the locket in her pocket pulsating like a second heartbeat. She had crossed into a realm of the inexplicable, a borderland where myth and reality merged. And there, she stopped to wait, the moon casting its silvery glow upon her. The world around her seemed to hold its breath, as if pausing for the event that was about to unfold. In this haunting quietude, her earlier trepidation was replaced by a sense of terrible clarity. She was here, driven by a quest for answers to questions she could barely articulate, a desperate gamble to redeem a soul, or perhaps to lose her own. Suddenly, the wind changed, carrying a scent she couldn't identify, raw and animalistic. And in that moment, a low, guttural howl echoed across the field, piercing the stillness, and making every hair on her body stand on end. She knew, with chilling certainty, that it was time. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the night with its mournful lament. In that instance, fear and wonder collided within her, like two galaxies merging in a cosmic dance of destruction and creation. The howl seemed to echo her own inner turmoil, a voice for the dread she could not express. With a shaking hand, she reached into her pocket and took out the silver locket, clutching it tightly as if it could shield her from the unknown. And as she stood there, enveloped by the silvery moonlight, she felt a strange kinship with the creature whose mournful howl had guided her to this fateful moment. Lily waited, the locket's cold metal pressed against her skin, its chill seeping into her very being. And as she did, the wind picked up, rustling the cornstalks like the whispering of ancient spirits. Above her, the moon reached its zenith, casting its fullest, most unyielding light upon the Silver Cornfield. And then, emerging from the depths of the field, a figure appeared. It was neither man nor beast, but something in between, a shadowy form that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if woven from the fabric of the night itself. Its eyes met hers, and in that gaze, she saw a mingling of unspeakable sorrow and eternal longing. And as it drew closer, she understood that this creature, this tortured soul caught between two worlds, was as much a prisoner of fate as she was. With a trembling hand, she extended the silver locket toward it, her every instinct screaming at her to flee, even as a deeper, more inexplicable urge compelled her to stay. And as the creature took the locket, its form seemed to shimmer, its outline blurring and shifting in the moonlight. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And in that eternal instant, bathed in the silvery glow of the moon, Lily felt a connection that transcended language, a communion of souls that defied all logic and understanding. And then, with a howl that seemed to echo through the very fabric of reality, the creature vanished, leaving her standing alone in the field, the locket still clutched tightly. The field stretched before her, an ocean of dark, rustling cornstalks that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The moon, bloated and glaring, illuminated her path with an eerie light. Every part of her wanted to turn back, but she had ventured too far into the mystery, too far into the depths of her own curiosities and perhaps her own hidden darkness. As Lily took her first steps into the Silver Cornfield, a shiver reverberated through her body. It was as if she had entered a space where the boundaries between the real and the unreal had dissolved, and what remained was a twilight zone of unsettling emotions and lurking fears. She moved cautiously, the soles of her boots sinking into the soft, moist earth with each step. Around her, the cornstalks seemed to whisper secrets as they swayed in the night wind. Their rustling seemed synchronized, like the choreographed movements of a dance only they understood. To her heightened senses, it felt like a conversation she was not privy to, yet one that was about her nonetheless. The deeper she ventured into the field, the more intense and grotesque the sounds became. What had started as whispers had now morphed into raspy breathing, an increasingly savage timbre that hinted at something inhuman. It wasn't the noise of wind through leaves, but of lungs that had tasted both the sweetness of air and the coppery tang of blood. The very atmosphere seemed to thicken with tension. A low growl reverberated through the air, rippling through her body like an electric charge. Her heart pounded with such ferocity it felt like it might burst out of her chest. Then she saw it. A silhouette, both hulking and oddly frail, emerged from the labyrinthine rows of corn. Yellow eyes glinted in the moonlight, eyes filled with a blend of anguish and something darker. As the creature drew closer, she could see its form more clearly, a nightmarish blend of man and wolf, its fur mottled with scars, its mouth a grimace of sharp, predatory teeth. But it was the eyes that held her. In them, she glimpsed a last vestige of something deeply human, pain, regret, and a longing for something lost long ago. In that moment, Lily realized that behind the monstrous exterior was a captive soul, yearning for release yet terrified of what that freedom might mean. She took a shaky breath and opened her pouch, pulling out the locket she had brought, offering it up as if it were some sacred relic. Her hand quivered. The werewolf looked at the locket and then at her. Its growl softened into a whine, its fierce eyes clouding over with something that resembled tears. It stepped back, as if the tiny piece of silver had the power to repel its massive form. Then it turned away, its body convulsing, a guttural howl escaping its throat. And just like that, the creature bolted, disappearing into the maze of corn, leaving Lily standing alone, trembling, yet strangely unharmed. The locket felt heavier now, burdened by the weight of the unspoken, the unknown, and the unfathomable. As she clutched it in her hand, Lily knew she had come face to face with a terror beyond her understanding, and had glimpsed a sadness deeper than any human sorrow. As she made her way back through the Silver Cornfield, the rustling of the corn seemed softer now, almost apologetic. When she finally emerged into the open air, it felt like a rebirth. She looked up at the moon, still remarkably bright, but now just an object in the sky, robbed of its otherworldly power. As she walked home, Lily couldn't escape the realization that she had entered the realm of legends and had come back irrevocably changed. She felt both smaller and larger than before, as if she had touched the fabric of the universe itself, unraveling threads she could never hope to tie back together. But one thing was painfully clear: she had seen the depths of both monstrosity and humanity coiled within a single tortured being, and in that encounter had found a twisted, unsettling kind of grace. In the days that followed her inexplicable journey into the Silver Cornfield, Lily found it difficult to reacquaint herself with the mundanity of her life. The sunlight seemed too harsh, as if the world had shed a layer of mystery that she couldn't replace. Every sound was duller, every scent blander, every taste less vibrant. She resumed her role in the everyday tapestry of the town, a patchwork of quiet desperation and stifling secrets. But she was not the same, and she knew it. She watched as the children in the schoolyard exchanged whispers, their faces a blend of fear and thrill. A legend of the Silver Cornfield had found a new chapter, one that was etched in hushed voices and nervous glances. They said that the werewolf had vanished, that it had found its redemption. Little did they know that the lore they whispered was not a tale of an ending, but the dawning of an unsettling beginning. Her family, blissfully ignorant of her nightly escapade, commented on how she had changed. "You've matured," her mother said one evening, looking at her as if seeing a different person. "But you also seem distant." Lily merely nodded, unable to articulate the transformation that twisted within her, a smoky blend of dread and awe that defied the confines of language. Days stretched into weeks, and the calendar on the wall marked the approach of yet another full moon. Lily felt an inexplicable tension build inside her. She couldn't dismiss the notion that her act in the cornfield, however incomplete, had changed something fundamental in the weft and weave of that cursed place. As the night descended and the moon took its place, a celestial voyeur peering into the lives of mortals, Lily found herself standing by her bedroom window. Her gaze was fixed on the dark silhouette of the Silver Cornfield, barely visible in the distance. Then it came, the howl. But it was not the same howl that had beckoned her into the cornfield weeks before. This was a sound more intricate, tinged with a melancholy she hadn't perceived earlier, and layered with a ferocity that was altogether new. It was as if the creature, wherever it was, had embraced its eternal torment while revealing a new layer of its complex agony. The howl trailed off, leaving a residue of silence that was both haunting and profound. Lily stood there, feeling an emotion she couldn't name, an amalgam of relief, horror, and an uncanny form of kinship. Her heart felt like a labyrinth, its every twist and turn reflecting the enigma of the Silver Cornfield, and the being that roamed within it. And so she understood that the curse was unbroken, that the werewolf remained a prisoner of its own existence. Yet it had changed, mutated into something even more unfathomable, something that reflected the dualities of life and darkness, human and monstrous. As Lily retreated from the window, she felt a curious sense of resignation. She had touched the fringes of the unknown and had been touched in return. There was no going back, not for her, and not for the wretched creature bound to the land and the moon. The town would continue its placid existence, its residents none the wiser. Children would swap embellished tales, adults would murmur prayers of thanks for their uneventful lives, and the cycle of days and nights would roll on. But woven into the fabric of that simplicity were threads of a story that defied understanding. A story that had claimed her as its witness and, in some ineffable way, its participant. Lily lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling but seeing only the endless rows of corn, hearing only the echo of that last, sorrowful howl. In the quiet of her room, she realized that some boundaries, once crossed, reshape you forever. And some howls, once heard, never really cease. They reverberate in the soul, a haunting melody in the intricate symphony of being. Ah, the sound of that final, sorrowful howl. It sends chills down your spine, doesn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another unsettling journey here on Our Scary Stories. As you lay in your bed tonight, staring into the dark void of your ceiling, ponder this. How many of us can truly resist the lure of the forbidden, the enigmatic? Remember, some boundaries, once crossed, reshape you forever. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep the lights on. You never know what lurks in the shadows. This is Our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.